So thank you everybody for joining. Today we're going to be talking about overriding the default security for ControlPoint and some parameters that you can build into the ControlPoint application that will allow you to define certain users that can run reports and actions through ControlPoint that may not be able to access those sites through SharePoint. On today's agenda, we'll be talking about the way that ControlPoint actually trims security, the groups that we create on the ControlPoint configuration site collection to manage user security, some parameters that you can create on our ControlPoint configuration site collection that will allow you to override that default security, and we'll also provide you links and access to some more information than we'll be able to cover necessarily during this call. So, better than discussing the process, I've actually brought up one of our test environments here. Be able to go ahead and demonstrate for you. And I'll go ahead and launch the ControlPoint application as the account I'm currently logged in as, which is the ControlPoint service account. And I'm going to hit my ControlPoint application. And when I launch ControlPoint as the service account, by default, that service account is going to be able to see all of the sites under all of my web applications here. When we install ControlPoint and we initially license it, we actually give the ControlPoint service account rights at the web application user policy level and on the content databases that allow us to see and run reports on any of these sites that we want to. But what if I'm logged in as a different user? I sign in as, let's say, my own account. The ControlPoint application from there is security trimmed. If my account doesn't either have permissions at the web application user policy level or a site collection administrator access, or depending on the group they're in, regular full control access, I actually won't be able to see all of these site collections when I expand them out. Here you can see, because of the group that I'm in on the ControlPoint configuration page, I can see some site collections that I might have site collection administrator access to, or I might be in an AD group that has site collection administrator access, but I can't see all of my sites, or more specifically, I can't select them and run reports like I can with the sites that I do have full control over. In a lot of cases, you'll have an end user that needs to run reports or needs to run actions on these sites, but you don't want to give them access to the actual site within SharePoint. Let's say you had a human resources site or a finance site with personally identifiable information or sensitive information, and you had a help desk team that you needed to run reports, but you didn't want to have access to those sites. We can use the ControlPoint application actually to define specific users that can see all these sites without necessarily being able to see them in SharePoint. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this session and reopen it as that service account, and we'll actually, instead of going to the ControlPoint application itself, we'll go to the site collection that ControlPoint sits on. This 1818 site is just a regular SharePoint site collection that hosts some lists for statistics and parameters that we have, and also serves as the sort of security page for ControlPoint. There isn't a separate way to give users permissions to ControlPoint. You do it directly through the Site Permissions menu of the ControlPoint configuration site. So I'm logged in as my service account right now. I can check out my ControlPoint application administrators group and see that my user is actually in this group. So by default, they're going to get all the standard ControlPoint security trimming, the ability to see those sites that they have full control over. What if I wanted them to have that full control? There's just a few steps that you have to take. What we'll actually do is you create a security override group, which I've actually done here already. It's just a regular SharePoint group that you give read access to and that you can call whatever you want. I've called it security override here just for clarity, but I could call it, help desk users, I could call it IT users, I could really call it whatever I want, as long as I match that name in the next step. So now that I have that group in place, and this user is in this group, I'm actually going to remove them from the original group and just have them in that override group. So they're a member of this group. Our next step is we have to tell ControlPoint to look for members of this group when they're overriding that default security. So I'm going to navigate to the ControlPoint settings list This is the list of all of the control point parameters, and by default there's about 180 that we create, but there are also a number of hidden parameters that we can create, and the security override group is actually one of them. So I'm going to create a new item here, and depending on what you want to give those users access to, there are a couple of different parameters that you can create. I'm not going to go over all of them just for the sake of time, but the two that are most important to remember are called, let me go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint script again, ActSecOvrW, which is my action security override group, and RPTSecOvrW. That's my reporting security override group. The main difference between those two groups is that a group that's in this parameter, the reporting override group, will be able to run reports on any sites within ControlPoint, and the ActSecOverride group will be able to perform any reports and any actions. Obviously, being able to perform any actions is a little bit more of a stretch. More commonly, people use the reporting override group, because if I'm in the action override group, in theory, I could run user security actions to give myself or other users permissions to those sites. Basically, on the back end, we're doing all of these actions as the ControlPoint service account, that account that we know already has full control to all of these sites. So we'll go back here, and we're going to enter that ActSecOvrW as the parameter name. For the parameter value, we're actually going to put in the name of the group that we created and that we put that end user in. It has to be case sensitive and space sensitive. Make sure you match the name of the group within SharePoint completely, otherwise we won't be able to read that. It takes it just as a literal string. Just for organization purposes, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the special purpose category, and I'll save this parameter. So now when I check my special purpose category, I can see that members of the security override group are part of this override parameter. In order to make that take effect, I'm going to go ahead and recycle this application pool, and I'll actually open up a new instance of Internet Explorer, and I'm going to run it as a different user and enter in my own credentials. So when I navigate over to the ControlPoint site, we'll let this load for a second. Oh, I'm actually getting access denied to the site. It's a little different than I expected. Let's go ahead and check out this ControlPoint site again to make sure we get the right permissions back here. A little strange, but just for testing purposes, we'll add that back in. You shouldn't normally have to have the user in both groups, but just to make sure that we don't have any issues and that I can show you the behavior that we expect from the security override, I'm going to go ahead and add that back in. So we'll reopen that session of Internet Explorer as my own account. Make sure we can hit the actual ControlPoint site collection first. There it is. There we go. So when I actually go to expand out, you remember the projects web application that we had before, I could only see, or more specifically, I could only select and run reports on about 4 of those site collections. When I expand this out now, you can see I have access to all 14. I can take one of the sites that I didn't already have access to, and I can go back here, and I can view any of the reports, just like I could as a service account. However, I'll go ahead and check out the URL of the site by opening our properties pane here. I select this site, copy it over. Let's go ahead and try to navigate to it. And I get an access denied because I don't have permissions to view that site through SharePoint. We're overriding the security through ControlPoint, but we're not actually overriding your ability to access that site through SharePoint. So this is a good alternative to giving those help desk users, or those end users, the ability to actually access and manipulate the data through the actual SharePoint site. Let's go back and change that parameter from the action security override. We'll edit it and make it just the reporting security override, and we'll show you how that limits those end users' ability to run actions on those ControlPoint sites. So we'll just change this back to report security override, save it, and recycle the Acceler application pool. And I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this directly. It may take a second to refresh because it's the first time we're spinning the application pool up. And we get ControlPoint spinning up again, just like before. I'll expand out my project's web application. You can see that I can still see all of these site collections. When I select my site, I still see the actions, but I don't have the ability to actually run the actions. It's a little strange behavior that we'll have to look into a bit further on our end. But the idea of the report security override is that limits your ability to actually run actions. You can only run the reports directly. And I'll have to refresh this because the application pool refreshed. So basically the idea is that if a user is in one of these security override groups, everything that they do through ControlPoint is going to be done as the service account. There's a couple of things to take into account there. If I'm running, let's say, some kind of action to modify user security, as opposed to it being audited as an event that is done by my user, your audit log and your change log will actually show those security permissions being changed by the service account. It's just something to keep in mind. We can't perform an action in SharePoint as a user, as an account that doesn't actually have that permission in SharePoint. So everything that we do and every change that we make is made as the actual service account. It's just something to keep in mind if you're performing auditing. So with that change made, it's just something that can make it a little bit easier for you to define out and delegate out those permissions to allow users to run reports, get you information, make minor changes without necessarily having to go through all these SharePoint sites and delegate those permissions out individually. I've actually pulled up on another window here our ControlPoint configuration and troubleshooting guide. If you've been on any of our previous quick takes, generally the information that we cover about configuring the discovery process, configuring for SSL, configuring alternate access mappings, we like to go to this guide because it tends to, in a little bit more detail, cover some of the information that we cover on our quick takes. And just like any of those other ones, this is no different. Inside of our guide here, on page 165, we have a section overriding ControlPoint default security, just like this. So this guide actually is going to detail the options that we have available for ControlPoint security overriding a little bit more broadly than we covered on our call here. You can see here this defines the reporting security override option, and it allows members of one or more ControlPoint user groups to perform data analyses for any site collection or site in the farm. Again, that's just the analysis option that we make available. But we also have some other security options, including -R, which is similar to what I just showed there, but it sort of changes the definition of that security trimming. If I don't have any permissions to a site, I won't be able to see it in ControlPoint, even with this parameter enabled. I have to have at least read or view pages permissions in order to be able to access a site through ControlPoint. So this guide is a great place to look to see the different options that are available. Here's my action override and my read options for that. So that's something just to keep in mind, is that you need to not only make that parameter change or add that parameter, you have to create the group through SharePoint, and you have to give it read permissions in order to be able to access that those sites as a member of that group. So I want to make sure we can open this up to any questions, concerns, or any other information that anybody wants to add here. In our webinar, there's a questions panel. You can ask our questions. I actually have John Singleton, who's a member of our team over here, on the call with me, able to answer any questions, but we want to make sure that we can address any issues you've seen trying to make this yourself, any further questions you have about how this works on the back end. And additionally, we like to hear about what other ideas people have for quick takes. This particular quick take is actually done as a request from a previous quick take that someone was looking to see on our knowledge base. So we definitely do respond to your questions, do respond to what people are interested in hearing about and getting additional information through ControlPoint. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to type them out and we can address them. I'll give people a minute if they want to do that. It actually looks like we don't have any additional questions today. That might just be because it's almost lunchtime. So what we'll do is we will have this posted up on our Metalogix knowledge base. If people aren't familiar with the Metalogix knowledge base, go ahead and navigate over to it here. And we'll go down to Support, Metalogix knowledge base. And I can actually filter that down to our ControlPoint options, including a section just for the ControlPoint quick take videos. You may have to put in your license key the first time you access the support knowledge base, but we actually have all of our previous 5 quick take sessions, as well as a couple of other items that somehow got themselves into this category. I'm not sure how they did that, but these are the 5 of them that were hosted by members of our support team. They're a great resource to take a look at, just like this, quick 15, 20-minute sessions describing one specific piece of ControlPoint functionality. So with that information said, we'll go ahead and get this recorded and posted. Please feel free to contact us directly if you have any questions, concerns around setting these security overrides up, or recommendations for quick takes. We can be reached through our support line, this 202-609-9100 number, or from the Metalogix website by selecting Support, Contact Support, and you can open a support ticket directly through our site as well. So once again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Obviously, my name is Paul McNally, as we mentioned before, member of our support team. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone on our team, and we'd be happy to help you further. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.